46 years old, and I had never taken a trip alone. Not once. 20 years of marriage will do that to you. You stop being a person who does things alone because there is always someone to do things with. And then, one day there isn't, and you realize you don't know how to be by yourself anymore. You've forgotten the shape of it. The divorce was finalized in June. No drama. No one did anything unforgivable. We just ran out of whatever we'd had, and we were honest enough with each other to say so. That's the version I tell people, and it's true as far as it goes. What it doesn't capture is what it feels like to dismantle a life that took 2 decades to build. The specific silence of a house that used to have 2 people in it. The way you reach for someone in the night for months before your body accepts they aren't there. My therapist suggested a solo trip. Go somewhere unfamiliar, she said. Spend time with yourself. Figure out what you actually like, separate from what you built a shared life around. Good advice. The kind of advice that sounds simple and isn't. I picked coastal Maine in October because it was off-season. I wanted quiet. I wanted somewhere I wouldn't have to perform being fine for anyone. No one to run into that I knew. No one who would look at me with that particular careful expression people get around recently divorced men. The Aldrich house was a bed and breakfast in a small town on the coast. Converted sea captain's home from the 1870s. 6 rooms. The owner was a man named Harold, 60-something, efficient in the way that people who run small operations alone become efficient. He gave you what you needed and didn't try to fill the silence around it. I appreciated that immediately. He put me in room 6, last room on the 2nd floor, end of the hall. Big window looking out over the water. I sat in the chair by that window for an hour doing nothing at all, and it was the first time in months that I hadn't felt like I was supposed to be somewhere else. Just sat there, watched the gray October water. Let the quiet be what it was. The first full day was good. I walked along the coast in the morning and ate lunch at a small place in town, and spent the afternoon reading in my room. Went to bed early. Slept better than I had in weeks. The second night I was in bed reading around 11 when I heard the front door of the house open. The old building carried sound the way old buildings do. Footsteps on the stairs, unhurried. Then Harold's voice below the level of words, that particular low, hospitable tone a host uses showing someone to a room. Another voice responding. A man, it sounded like. I couldn't make out what either of them said, but the cadence was clear. Late check-in. Harold showing the new guest upstairs. The footsteps moved along the hall and stopped just on the other side of my right wall. I heard the sounds of a room being entered, the door closing. Harold's footsteps retreating back down the stairs, then the ordinary sounds of someone settling in for the night. Movement across the floor. Water running briefly in what I assumed was a bathroom. The particular creak of an old bed accepting weight. I lay there and listened to it, and felt something I hadn't expected. Something close to comfort. The sounds of another person nearby. Not talking, not requiring anything, just existing in the adjacent space. I had forgotten how much I missed that. How much of what I missed about 20 years of marriage was just that. Another person breathing in the next room. The evidence of not being alone. I fell asleep thinking about that. In the morning, Harold was in the dining room with coffee, and I mentioned it casually. Said it sounded like he'd had a late check-in next door. Made some small remark about hoping I hadn't kept the new guest up with my light. Harold set the coffee pot down and looked at me. He said there was no room next to mine. I said the room to my right, through the wall. He said that wall backed onto the exterior of the building. My room was at the end of the hall. There was no room 7. I went upstairs after breakfast, stood in the hallway and looked at it properly. Harold was right. The hall ended at my door. No door to the right of mine, no door across from mine at the end of the building, just plaster wall. I walked to it and ran my hand along it. solid. Old plaster over lath, cool and unbroken. I went into my room and stood at the right wall, the one the sounds had come through. Put my ear against it. Cold. Noticeably colder than the other walls in the room. Not dramatically so, but enough that you felt the difference clearly when you pressed your palm against it and then against the other walls. The right wall was cold in a way that the outside temperature on an October night might explain if there was only exterior siding on the other side. I went outside and walked around the building. Counted the windows on the second floor. 6 windows. My window was the last one on the right side of the building. There was no window beyond mine. The building simply ended. I didn't mention to Harold that I had gone out to check. I didn't want to seem alarmed because I wasn't sure yet whether I had any reason to be. There were explanations. Sound travels strangely in old buildings. I might have heard something from below, from another part of the house, and the direction of it was distorted by the walls and the way the structure carried noise. I had been in a specific emotional state, newly alone, wanting to hear the evidence of other people. Maybe I had heard what I wanted to hear. That night I lay in bed and listened. Quiet for a long time. Nothing from the right wall. Then at 11:40, something. Breathing. From the other side of the wall. Faint, but clear once I identified it. Slow and even. Not the rhythm of someone awake, the particular steady rhythm of a man asleep, deep and regular, the kind of breathing that takes no effort. I lay still and listened to it. I am going to be honest about this. It was not frightening in the way you might expect. It was slow and steady, and the regularity of it was almost hypnotic. I lay there in the dark, listening to the breathing of something on the other side of a wall that shouldn't have anything behind it. And at some point, without meaning to, I fell asleep. I woke at 3 in the morning. The breathing had stopped. The wall was silent. Then one knock. From inside the wall. Single, clear, deliberate. The sound of knuckles on a hollow surface. Once. Then nothing. I lay in the dark for a long time after that without sleeping. I spent most of the next day in town. Walked around, sat in a coffee shop, browsed a bookstore on the main street. I wasn't ready to ask Harold directly about what I'd heard. I wanted some ground under me first. I mentioned the Aldrich house in a few casual conversations. People spoke well of it. Harold runs it well. Nice place. Been there a long time. Nothing useful. In the bookstore, there was a woman behind the counter who had clearly been in that town her entire life. The specific comfort of someone who belongs exactly where they are. I asked her about the Aldrich house and she nodded. I asked about the history of the building and she was happy to talk. Built in 1873, she said, by a sea captain named Aldrich. Passed through his family. Became a boarding house for a stretch in the 40s. Private residence again after that. Harold bought it in the 90s and turned it into what it was now. I asked about the second floor, the rooms specifically. She said there used to be 7 rooms. Then there were 6. When Harold renovated, he had one closed off. Structural issue, he told people. The wall wasn't safe to keep open. I asked which room. She thought for a moment, looking at something in the middle distance. Then she said, the end one. The small one at the end of the hall. Room 7, it was called back in the boarding house days. I drove back and found Harold in the kitchen, and I asked him directly. Told him what the woman had said. He was quiet for a moment. Not uncomfortable exactly. More like a man measuring what he wants to say. He confirmed it. There had been a room. He closed it off during the renovation. Water damage had gotten into the structure, he said, and repairing it properly would have cost more than the room was worth as a rental. So he took it off the plans and sealed it up. I asked when. He said 2009. I asked if anything had happened in the room before he closed it. He was quiet for longer this time. Then he said a man had died in there. 2007. A guest. Natural causes officially, but he had been alone in the room, and it had been 4 days before anyone on staff noticed he hadn't been seen. They didn't keep that information on the website, Harold said, which was understandable. Which was also the kind of thing that explained a great deal. I stood there, and then I asked him one more thing. Whether he ever heard anything from that wall. From the direction of where room 7 used to be. Harold looked at me steadily and said he didn't sleep on the 2nd floor. I stayed the rest of my week. I made that decision the same afternoon, and I kept it. Something about leaving felt like the wrong response to the wrong thing, or the right response but at the wrong time, and I couldn't work out which. So I stayed. I heard the breathing again on night 4 and night 6, always beginning around 11:30, always that same slow, even rhythm. The single knock came both times at 3 in the morning. Once. Clear. Then silence. I didn't knock back. I thought about it both times, lay in the dark with my knuckles raised toward the wall, genuinely uncertain. I didn't do it. On my last morning, Harold made a full breakfast. We ate across from each other and didn't discuss any of it. He asked if I'd enjoyed my stay. I said yes, and I meant it, mostly. The week had given me something I hadn't expected, which was the feeling of having sat with something difficult and not run from it. That was worth something. At the door, I turned and asked him about the man who died in room 7. What he had been doing there. Whether he was a tourist. Harold said he was a man who had recently gone through a divorce, wanted to be alone for a while, went somewhere unfamiliar. He walked in the mornings, Harold said, and his car was in the lot every night, and everyone assumed he was simply someone who kept to himself. I stood in the doorway for a while. Harold didn't say anything else. I thanked him and walked to my car. I sat there for a moment before I started the engine. Looked back at the building. 2nd floor. The exterior wall where room 7 would have been. No window there, just siding. But there was a mark. Old and weathered, and easy to miss if you weren't looking. A rectangle in the siding where the paint was a slightly different shade than everything around it. Filled in and painted over. Where a window used to be before Harold closed the room and sealed it off in 2009. I think about that man sometimes. Alone in that room for reasons that sound like mine. And I think about what it means that whatever lives in that wall breathes the way a sleeping man breathes. Slow and even and completely calm, like something that found a place it was comfortable in and simply stayed. I think about the knock at 3 in the morning. One knock. Always once. I've spent time trying to decide if it was trying to say something or if it was just a sound it made, a reflex, something it did without intention. I couldn't settle it. But I keep coming back to the window, the filled-in rectangle on the exterior wall where room 7 used to look out over the water. Harold closed that room and took away its window when he sealed it up in 2009. Whatever is in there used to be able to look out, used to have that view of the gray October water that I sat beside every morning. Harold took that from it when he closed the wall. I don't know if that matters to something that breathes like it's sleeping and knocks once in the dark at 3 in the morning, but I think it might. I think something with that kind of patience and that kind of stillness has had a long time to think about what it no longer has. A long time in the dark, in a sealed room, with nothing left but the wall and whatever comes to sleep on the other side of it. One knock, every time. I think it knew I was there. I think it knew I was alone. I think it understood something about why. I just don't know what it wanted me to do about it.